Hello everyone, this is Jason Merkel with HobbyZone Hobby, and we're here today to repair a foam aircraft model. In this case, we've got the HobbyZone AeroScout S that we actually crashed during a video shoot, and you can see here that the fuselage is broken. And so what we're going to talk about here applies to a lot of foam aircraft. In this case, EPO foam is a little bit different than EPS foam. Usually our larger RC aircraft models are made out of the EPO foam, which is a little bit more dense, a little more durable, a little bit easier to repair with a wider variety of glues. EPS foam is usually used in the lighter, smaller, ultra micro aircraft. That foam is better for those smaller airplanes, but also it does require special glue to repair that. So we'll mention that here in a minute. So one of the things we'll talk about is that you can use relatively common two-part epoxy. A lot of people are familiar with this. In this case, we've got some 6-minute epoxy here, which you can mix in equal parts in the cup using like a popsicle stick or toothpicks, and then you can apply that to the joint, let that dry, and then actually before it dries you can clean it off with some isopropyl rubbing alcohol. So that is one way to do it. We're going to cheat a little bit here. We're going to use some CA glue because it's a little bit faster. So some people will know this as super glue. It is formulated slightly differently within our RC industry to work a little bit better with the products that we're using the glue on. So in this case we've got some thin viscosity, which is very, very thin, almost like water. This is good for really tight joints or tight cracks that you need to fill in. Then we've got medium, which is also considered gap filling. This is what I use for a lot of repairs where you've got some broken parts and you've got a fair bit of space between the two and you need to put them back together. There's also foam safe CA. Now this is formulated differently. It's basically odorless. It has no odor to it, and that is the glue that you would use on EPS foam. It will also work on EPO foam, but that said, it is absolutely necessary for EPS foam. So a lot of people, when they're buying glue, they'll buy the foam safe CA just to make sure they've got the right glue no matter what foam they have. That said, in this case we're going to use just the regular medium CA because it works fine on EPO foam. Next to that here we've got also activator. Also, some people consider it accelerator, and so this will actually make the CA glue dry quicker. So normally these CA glues don't take very long to dry, sometimes seconds up to just a couple of minutes to cure completely. The activator accelerator will help that kind of come down to just a few seconds usually. So I like to use that because it speeds along the repair process. Also, we've got some clear packing tape here. Sometimes after you make a repair, it helps to tape over top of that just to be safe as well. I would not use tape alone. That, in this case, especially for damage like this, is not enough. Some people do use glue for certain smaller things, but in this case, we're going to use a combination of CA glue and the clear tape over top of that when we're done. So one nice thing about this airplane is it's a pusher configuration, so the motor and propeller are behind the nose. This hit on the nose and it hit very hard, and that's actually why I broke the tail back here. But what's really interesting about it, there's a carbon tube that goes all the way from in the fuselage structure here to the tail. So you can see that even though the foam broke, the tail is still on the airplane. In this case, it's not structurally sound enough to fly, but it is repairable. So you can buy an entire replacement fuselage. That is one option. But if you want to save a little bit of cost and time, you can just repair the fuselage you already have. So we're going to start by looking at the damage here on the fuselage, and I can see it basically wraps all the way around it. All the way from the top, there's a couple of different cracks and tears here, around the side, onto the bottom. You can see there's a joint in the fuselage, that kind of line in the middle there, it's broken there, plus it's got those cracks all the way around. So what I'm going to do first is basically put the medium gap filling CA glue in all of those cracks and joints all the way around. Then I'll probably wipe it down with a paper towel to get some of the excess glue off, and then I'll hit it with the accelerator. However, one thing we have to watch out for is that we get the tail relatively straight again. If you glue it on crooked, honestly, the airplane will fly. It just won't work as well as it should. So if you've got it, twisted off one side, every time you pull up elevator, it's going to roll. And so in this case, we're going to eyeball it straight. In some cases, it helps to have an additional person or a jig or a square to help square that up. It doesn't need to be perfect. We're just going to get it kind of eyeball straight, so to speak. And so we'll show that here. I'm going to move some of these items out of the way to make some space. And again, I'm going to focus on using this medium gap filling CA. I'm going to start by removing the cap, kind of look at different joints here. I'm going to start on the top and then I'm going to work my way towards the bottom. So I'm going to twist the foam apart to make some room for the tip of the glue bottle to get down in there. I'm going to apply the glue somewhat liberally here. This is a pretty significant crack and significant damage here, so there's a lot of gap in there to fill. So I'm going to get plenty of glue in there. And as I'm going, I'm kind of twisting the parts a bit to make sure that I get down in every nook and cranny. I want to make sure that I use plenty of glue for this repair. You guys can see I'm kind of following all the way around the fuselage, and I'm almost back to the top now. And I've used a liberal amount of glue, so what's going to happen is as I kind of twist this back into shape and kind of push the foam back into shape, I want to make sure that glue does come out of the joints, so that means I've got plenty in there. And then to make it look nice again, I'm going to go ahead and wipe it down with a paper towel. Now granted, when you repair something, it never looks as good as new, but in this case, we'll try to make it look as nice as we can. So, now that I've got glue in there liberally, it's going to be important on that alignment again. Now inherently, because of that substructure with the carbon tube in there, it does somewhat want to kind of hold this shape and position. You can see the glue hasn't dried yet. So while it is curing, I'm going to try and hold this relatively straight here, and I'm going to use this activator and accelerator to accelerate the drying process here. I'm going to spray it just from a distance, kind of get just a little bit onto the glue to get it to start setting. And I can actually feel it starting to get a little bit more solid now. Before I have it dry all the way, I'm going to spray some on the bottom here as well. Also kind of eyeballing it to make sure that it stays relatively straight. And I can feel the glue is starting to set. Flip it back over. So you guys can see as I'm moving the tail section now, it's definitely a lot more secure than it was before. And again, I may not be able to get the alignment completely perfect, just like new. That's okay. We just need to be in the ballpark. I'm going to look at it not only to make sure that the tail surfaces are horizontal and vertical, I'm also going to look at the tail boom here and make sure that it's relatively straight up and down. And then also look at it from the side. So the glue is still setting up, and when I used that activator, I didn't apply too much of it. I wanted it to just get to the glue mostly on the outside to kind of set it into place. And then what I'm going to do now is go back to the joints, and I can see some cracks that are still visible, and I'm going to fill those with this gap filling CA. So I'm kind of putting CA down in there. You have to be careful because it does have some of that activator still on the surface. If I touch the glue tip to the surface and get the activator on the tip of the glue bottle, it could clog the bottle. So I'm going to be careful there. So I'm adding this glue to kind of fill these cracks and joints. Yeah, it's looking much better now. Now generally speaking, if this particular model did not have that carbon rod running down from the fuselage structure to the tail, I would probably not attempt this repair. You could potentially stick a stick in there or some toothpicks in there to glue the two pieces together, and that might be okay, but that probably wouldn't be as structurally sound as you need it to be. So very fortunately, our engineers designed this airplane very well, did a great job of putting that carbon rod in there. So I'm just filling in some more of these gaps. So some would argue this is why epoxy might have been better for this repair, because it would have filled in the space a little bit better and I wouldn't have had to come back with quite so much CA glue. But a lot of times I'm anxious and I like to get things fixed as quickly as possible, and the CA glue helps make that a faster process. So you guys can see the tail is starting to kind of get more solid here in the structure. I've got more glue in. I'm going to put some more activator on. And some of what you're seeing here, the gap in the decal, it's really more cosmetic than anything else. Try and spray that in there. Come around to the bottom. Got some glue kind of squirting out, so I'm going to wipe that down a little bit. Spray some more activator. I do want to point out that not all of the activators that are out there are safe for use with all foams and all plastics. So in this case, it does warn on the warning label here that you need to be careful, make sure that the surface you're using it on is safe to use with this activator. This EPO foam is fine with it. If it was EPS foam, I probably would not use as much or use this at all. And then also if I was gluing some plastic parts together, especially painted plastic parts, I may not use this because it could damage the paint finish or the plastic itself. But in this case, it works perfect for our intended application here. So you guys can see it's a big difference from when we started. Those joints are almost completely secure now. So as it's continuing to dry, I'm going to look and see if there's any more gaps to fill. I see a few more here. Going to hit it with some more glue. And truth be told, in this case, there's probably not such a thing as too much glue. So I'm going to keep putting glue down in there until I'm confident that I've filled it completely. Wipe that down a little more. Keep wiping it down, making sure we got glue in the joint. Now, a lot of times when you're gluing two parts together and you've got a break in it, you would use pressure to push those two pieces together as you're gluing them to make sure they're as secure as possible. In this case, the structure kind of got twisted and tweaked, and so some of the foam got compressed. And because we have that carbon rod structure in there, it already is going to maintain its shape without pushing the foam on each side back together. And we really can't, because some of the foam was compressed to a point where it's now spread apart. You could potentially massage that foam back into shape to make it touch again without kind of having a gap. But in this case, we're just going to fill the gaps with the glue, and it will be fine. So I'm going to wipe the airplane down now, and I'll show you that the tail section is now very secure. You can see now it's structurally sound enough to go and fly with. See, I'm twisting it there. It may not be quite as good as new. It may not look as good as new, but it will be structurally sound enough to fly. So what I will do though, just as an extra measure, I'm going to wipe this down, make sure I don't have any more of that activator there. So I'm going to take some of the clear packing tape and wrap it around those joints. It will help protect them to make sure that they don't break as easily in typical handling. So I'm going to start on the top, and I'm going to use my thumb here to push the tape down into some of these different curves and crevices, trying to keep it as tight as possible going around. You can see I'm coming up on this side now. And I'm going to use one more piece going back the other way. So again, tape would not have been enough for this particular repair. In some cases, there are repairs you can get away with just using tape, but in this case, we needed to get plenty of glue down into the cracks and crevices, get it glued back together securely, and then the tape is just some additional protection on top of those joints to make sure that they don't come apart very easily. So again, you can kind of see there, it may not be beautiful, but it certainly is functional. Tail is back on, nice and secure. And this airplane is almost ready to fly again.